I need you to know something about me. I'm, unsurprisingly, not the most social person. While it appears that I am a beacon of confidence on screen, that is definitely not the case. In fact, the shy in my Shy Chef is much more literal than you would first think. I'm not against socializing. However, I'd rather, not. However, I recently needed to make a good first impression, and was rather nervous. That got me to think, how do people socialize? It got me to think, how do people make good first impressions? And while I could have looked up some steps online or whatever, I realized there are a number of WEBTOON characters that made us instantly fall in love with them. While I don't believe in love in first sight, I do believe that there are WEBTOON characters that might be the exception to that rule. So today, we're looking at some characters who have quickly won us over. You can check out the WEBTOONs that I'm spoiling in the description below. First, let's check out a WEBTOON I just talked about last week, Lore Olympus. Lore Olympus recently hit Season 2, and a quick side note, this most recent chapter, where everyone is basically on a Zoom call, is probably one of my favorite chapters. Anyways, a couple weeks ago we were introduced to a new character, Echo. Echo was seemingly a standard character. It's unknown if she's a god or a nymph, however in standard Greek mythology she's a nymph. Introduced as Hera's new assistant. She, at first, didn't do much except serve Hera some tea. Now, part of Echo's popularity is definitely her design. The author of Lore Olympus, Rachel Smythe, does a great job at her character designs. It's hard to find a character that isn't designed well. And due to that design, after she was introduced, Instagram was flooded with Echo fan art, a lot of which is incredible. However, Echo quickly cements herself as a great character when Apollo approaches. Now, if you haven't read the series, then you should know that Apollo isn't well liked. In fact, he's in my video of why we hate certain WEBTOON characters. When Apollo barges in to speak with Hera, Echo steps in between them. Excuse me, you don't have an appointment, correct? Everybody needs an appointment to speak with the Queen. Her time is very valuable. Even Zeus himself has to make an appointment to see the Queen when she's working. Are you saying you're more important than Zeus? I love when a character is logical, but seeing a character out-logic someone else is just the coolest, especially when it's against someone like Apollo. And I think that's the important reason here. Echo doesn't do much, but she shows her alignments. When Echo aligns herself against Apollo, she technically aligns herself with us, the readers. The expression, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, fits here. When Echo goes against Apollo, we accept her onto our side, as people who hate Apollo. And it's not just that. By also standing in front of Hera, she's basically defending her. And here's where we get the other side. By aligning herself with Hera, you get basically every reader of Lore Olympus. The people who love Hera, and the people who hate Apollo. A commenter once said that they're taking notes for when they make a WEBTOON, which, thank you for valuing my opinion, but when applying this into a WEBTOON, there are certain restrictions that might make this method difficult to use. Remember, Lore Olympus is on Season 2. Echo was one of the newest named characters introduced in quite a while. The last important character that was introduced was Ares, back in Season 1, I believe. This method is difficult because it requires that the WEBTOON already be in progress. It requires that we already have strong opinions on these characters. Like very strong, cemented opinions. If Apollo's hatred or Hera's likability was any less, then Echo's likability would be less. Also remember that there were no new important characters introduced recently. Echo is a breath of fresh air into the series, adding someone new with a great design and that goes against people we hate. Moving on, let's talk about your favorite WEBTOON, Unordinary. Now, a lot of unordinary main characters are introduced in a relatively neutral manner. I'll touch on that later. If we do what I technically do and ignore the prologue, John, Serafina, and Remy are pretty neutral. I'll touch on Arlo in a bit, but I want to focus on Eisen and Blake. More so Eisen though. Both of these guys are introduced in episode 1, and in a pretty spectacular fashion. Blake is smashed through a wall by Eisen, and they proceed to absolutely wreck a bunch of school property. I got in trouble for accidentally breaking a pencil sharpener, but they can destroy walls. Doesn't matter. Now, there are a lot of things and moments in this moment, and throwing anyone through a wall is extreme. However, the reason is importance. And well, it's because Blake broke Eisen's pen clip. I'm not the funniest person, but I'm willing to admit that often humor is a very easy way to establish characters. Now, humor itself is dependent on the person, but going to the extreme can establish someone as a humorous person. It's obvious that they're close friends. If they weren't, this moment wouldn't have been as humorous as it was. But by establishing Eisen as a humorous person and establishing a friendship between them, we see two things: humor and friendship. Two things that many people like in a person. When you establish someone as funny, or establish that they can be good friends with others, then you establish them as typically good people. Now, before moving on to our next good first impressions, we need to talk about two bad first impressions. These first impressions aren't made to be good. They're purposely established as bad first impressions. Let's stay on Unordinary and talk about Arlo. Ignoring the prologue, Arlo appears in episode 13. Now, at this point, we've been introduced to a lot of the main characters. John, Serafina, Elaine, Blake, Eisen, and meanwhile Remy is introduced later. Now, we've gotten enough of Serafina to have a positive opinion on her. However, when Arlo was first introduced, we see that Serafina is visibly disinterested in just about everything Arlo has to say. Arlo establishes something important: that when we like and respect a character, we trust their opinion. We trust their opinion, believing their opinion to be true, especially when it comes to topics or people we know nothing about. Think of this like Echo's first impression, but reversed. Instead of a character aligning themselves with a character we already know, it's a character we already know that aligns themselves with the new character. And this could be a pretty solid way of introducing a character. By making a character we already have a positive or negative reaction to, we in turn gain a positive or negative reaction based on them. And if we move on, let's talk about a webtoon that deserves a little more credits. Nice to Meet You. It's a webtoon that's pretty recent, and I read it on Canvas, not to brag. Anyways, it's another romance webtoon, with great art, fun characters, and cat. God, I love cats. Anyways, Nice to Meet You has a wide variety of characters. Our main characters Mew and Days, and some side characters. And those side characters are who I want to talk about. First, Mickey. Introduced as a friend to one of our main characters, Days, while he's not really introduced directly, more just kind of stares at both main characters and seems to be scheming. Eventually seems to be interested in our other main character, Mew, and eventually kind of becomes, aggressive? Staring at Mew and eventually asking her out, and he doesn't seem to take no for an answer. Now, Mickey's actions are incredibly rude, scaring Mew and even the readers. But we're eventually given a reason why. Now, our main character, Days, is incredibly handsome. This is canon, this is not opinion. Practically everyone agrees, including Mickey. When Win's character pressures Mickey on why he's going after Mew, he explains, "What are you talking about? I'm just making sure they like him for more than just superficial reasons. Remember that one crazy chick from high school? He's so pure and innocent, most of the girls in school are drooling over him. Those girls are just looking for a hookup or to show him off at some frat party. He doesn't need any more of those kinds of girls. I don't want to see him get crushed again because he's more than just looks. I'm just looking out for my guy." Mickey would use his looks to check if girls were just into Days because of his looks. And it's a noble pursuit. He sacrifices himself by seeing if they would eventually ask him out instead of Days. And I understand his reasoning. His friend was hurt and he wants to protect him. But due to his first impression being very negative, it was difficult to rebound off of that. Everyone is still suspicious of Mickey, even if he did a bad thing for a good reason. We can contrast this to Win, someone who technically shouldn't have the best first impression either, but still kind of does. Win's introduction to us is that he steals a student ID card and he blackmails his friends. Yet, it works. It's another Aizen situation, but kind of reversed. Instead of focusing on humor, it focuses on friendship. Let me explain. Sure, blackmailing your friend isn't typically a friendship activity, but wanting the Pokemon Mew in a Master Ball for your friend's ID isn't really that bad, and actually kind of establishes a joker and carefree attitude. You know, you only bully your close friends. Right? People do that. Am I a bad friend? Doesn't matter. It establishes their close friendship, and people like people with good friendships. So, what does that mean? I wanted to establish how characters make good and bad first impressions, but I wanted to point out something else. Notice who I talked about. Echo, Aizen, Arlo, Mickey, Win. Wine? When? I'm not thinking about that. Doesn't matter. These characters have varying degrees of importance to them. Echo has literally only been in one chapter, Mickey is still kind of important, as in Aizen, but they're both kind of background characters. Meanwhile, Win and Arlo both have relatively important roles. But they're very overshadowed by the main characters. I never talked about Persephone, Hades, John, Seraphina, Days, or Mew, except for story purposes. These characters were introduced in a much more neutral manner, often without extravagance or showmanship. Out of these characters, Mew is the most standout, because she purposely trades her ID for Days' to create some chaos. But most of these characters aren't introduced by some special means, and that's intentional. Like I said, the characters that I talked about are often background main characters, important or seemingly important characters, but not the main characters. That's because main characters' first impressions aren't as important. For side characters, first impressions matter because impressions matter. Let me rephrase that. First impressions matter because they often don't get a chance to make other impressions. The stars of the show have the limelight, and when we're introduced to them in a more neutral turn, it's because it's a slow burn. You're given time to develop the character, you're given time to watch them, you're given time to appreciate what they do, their actions, and understand them. And since they're given more screen time. Therefore, sometimes details and moments with the main characters fall by the wayside. Think of it like this. If you were given 100 moments with a person, would you 100% care about moment 1? Sure, it's nice to recall, but you're more interested in moments 70 through 100. You're given so much of them that some moments just fall by the wayside. You might forget moment 42 or 27. That's just kind of a given. Meanwhile, if you're given 10 moments with a character, all of those moments matter, since you're given so little. Half of these first impressions require other people in it, which makes it difficult to pull off when you want to introduce your main character. And maybe you don't want them to have a specific characteristic that's enjoyed by everyone, like humor. A main character's first impression is probably the least important first impression. It's often their story you're telling. You're telling us a story about who they are, sure, but more importantly, you're telling us a story on who they become. John, Seraphina, Persephone, Hades, Days, Mew, we're reading a story on them. We're not reading a story on Echo or Aizen. We're not reading a story on Arlo or Win or Mickey. The reason that their first impressions matter is because we don't follow them around as much. We don't get to see how they work as much. We don't get to see them as much. That's why we see more backgroundy characters with great first impressions. Because when push comes to shove, sometimes that's all they might get. If we were introduced to John as Season 2 John, even if we were given everything, he would have been much more divisive than he is right now. But he still would have gotten people on his side. It's like the hardcore leveling warrior fallacy. Now, I didn't talk about hardcore leveling warrior in this video, and I won't a lot, because I'm just going to be talking about episode 1. He is a terrible person in episode 1. He kills people for no reason, he bribes the police, he is just awful. However, that's okay, because we're given his story. We get to see him grow, develop, change. I'm not saying that the first impression of a character isn't important, but what I am saying is that the first impression of a main character doesn't necessarily need to be positive. Since it's their story, we get to see who they become. We get to see how they change for the better or for the worse. With background characters and backgroundy main characters, we don't get to see that as much. We don't follow their movements as much. We don't follow their pattern, their story as much. Don't get me wrong, you definitely do with some characters. Aizen and Arlo, for example, are very main backgroundy characters. But with characters like Echo or Mickey, their impressions matter because we might not get impressions of them later on in the later seasons. We might, but we might not. And that's why I think first impressions matter more for the background characters than the main stars of the show. But that's just what I think. What about you? Do you agree with my strange mentality of first impressions? Who was your favorite first impression, or did I miss one? Leave it in the comments below. But, like always, thank you for watching.